something that is super exciting. Of course, myself being a small business owner here in Edmonton, we of course specialize in marketing and specifically about branding. And it's just super exciting to be talking about a topic that I feel is very relevant today, which is consumer behavior. And what does that mean exactly? What is consumer behavior? What does that apply to when it comes to your brand, when it comes to your personal brand, aside from your business brand as well? Because I know probably people who are listening to this are thinking to themselves, well, this is great for a business, but how does it apply to my business brand? And I guess for myself, it would be consumer behavior is about identifying a need. So usually there is a need that you want to address. There's usually some sort of emotion that you want to address. And to alleviate that need, to address that want, usually the consumer would go out and jump back and forth and try and solve that need. So it's kind of interesting to take a look at that. It's kind of interesting to take a look at why consumer behavior is super important, because I find is that when you take a step back, you get real insight and real effective marketing strategies when you do take a step back. But for all of you joining in, of course, you are all here because of consumer behavior, and I'm going to be giving you all the 4 factors that definitely addresses consumer behavior today. This can apply to both a business or personal brand, especially when it comes to this time where now we've had time to a little bit reflect on what are we going to say, how are we going to say it, how are we going to be a little bit more mindful of the words that we use, to be intentional behind our branding, to be intentional behind our products and services in the long run. And that's kind of what I've been going over today. So the first factor that affects consumer behavior, if you're thinking about consumer behavior and you're thinking about just people in general, the first factor is cultural. And when I say cultural, people think to themselves, well, geographic, right? They're thinking of a city, they're thinking of a country, they're thinking of an area of the map of a neighborhood that may be cultural. But in reality, cultural can mean something like social class. It can mean something like subculture. It can mean other aspects of culture that we don't really think about. So for myself, growing up, I loved the hip hop culture. I thought it was really, really cool. And it's interesting how something that isn't just music had evolved over time and became a culture, from the fashion you wear, from the shoes you wear, from the way that you acted, from the respect that came in the hip hop culture. And that is something that affects consumer behavior. The second thing that usually affects consumer behavior as we're diving into all of this is social. So now we're looking a little bit outwards when it comes to consumer behavior. Now we're looking at things like our family. We're looking at things like the people that we surround ourselves with. We're thinking about important institutions that definitely affected our perspective growing up. We're thinking about something in a reference group of people we surround ourselves with. I mean, how many of you, and definitely leave a thumbs up in the comments, have heard the saying that you are most likely like the 5 people that you surround yourself with, that you are most likely like the people of your family and friends because you are so surrounded by their perspective, and that in turn influences your consumer behavior. I mean, how many times my mom's usually like, I found this product and because it came from her, just for some reason, I tend to listen a little bit more. So that's another factor that influences consumer behavior. So that's cultural, now social. Now the third factor that influences consumer behavior, so we've looked outwards into the world. We looked at cultural, we looked at subculture, we've looked at social, we looked at the things that influence us. Now we're taking a flip when it comes to consumer behavior, and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, what about us? So things like, so this is personal, so this is age, occupation, different life stages that you're in. So for example, when I was a kid, I loved candy. I think it's fantastic. But now, of course, now that I'm older, you have to make smart decisions because I changed life stages. I've educated myself that I can't have candy all the time, that I should definitely think about greens and fruits and all these other things because they're healthy for you. And that's just a different life stage. That's something that now we're looking inwards. That affects our consumer behavior as a whole. So 4 factors affecting consumer behavior: cultural, social, personal, And now the last is psychological. Okay, so psychological. What does that mean exactly? I am so blessed to be surrounded by such amazing entrepreneurs and visionaries and small business owners who have the motivation, the inspiration, and the vision to get up every single day towards their purpose. And this is the last aspect of things that affects consumer behavior, is our motivation. And that comes with psychological. That comes with what else is there out there for us aside from, for example, our occupation or the people we surround ourselves with. There's something in our heads that tend to happen when it comes to consumer behavior because we have a bigger intention in mind. And that's hard to say because we all have our own motivations when it comes to our business or our personal goals, etc. Now, you're probably hearing all this and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, that's fantastic, Joanne. That's really, really awesome. But how does that apply to me? Like, this is great information. I kind of have a little bit more in-depth information regarding consumer behavior, about the 4 factors that affect consumer behavior, but how can that be for me? And I do just want to take a little bit step back and say what's one thing that links all 4 factors together. The one thing that is consistent throughout cultural, social, personal, and psychological is storytelling. It's interesting when you think about this because storytelling, surprisingly, since the beginning of time, has always been the way we've passed down information. From legends to things like Greek mythology to Roman mythology, we have legends and stories of what we've told ourselves, of what we tell our grandchildren, of passing down information. So if you're thinking about all the factors that affect consumer behavior, cultural, social, personal, and psychological, storytelling has been ingrained in us for the longest time, has been the way that we've been able to differentiate ourselves throughout the years. And how that applies to you, how that applies to your business is now you have to think to yourself in a different way of how you're going to market. So many times, a typical story, as you all know, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So in the beginning, how you started. In the middle is, of course, present right now. You're building your business, you're building your personal brand, you're building your community, you're building your vision towards your goals. And then at the end, you've, of course, achieved it. But the unfortunate part of all of this is that when we think about branding, when we think about marketing, when we think about sales, we so often forget the beginning and the middle, and then we so often just focus on the end. And what do I mean by that exactly? So let's say at the end, your aim is to make a certain revenue for your business. Let's say at the end, you want to hike a mountain and you want to go do a marathon. But the unfortunate part of all of this is, as you're going through it, is that we tend to ask prior to explaining the beginning and the middle. We tend to say, buy from me because of my service. I bring all this experience, but we don't tell the story behind why it's passionate for you. We don't tell the story behind why you want to achieve those fitness goals, why you want to climb that mountain. There's just so much deeper that if storytelling really is the way that you're going to attract people, and that's the way since the beginning of time that we've remembered things, then why is it in a society where we're so used to talking with people, we tend to talk at people? And that's always an interesting way to look at all of that. So now we've gone through consumer behavior, now we've gone into storytelling, and now what I'm going to go into is social media. So we've kind of jumped bases here quite quickly in a very, very short time span. So we've started off with why consumer behavior is important, the factors that influence it, and now we've talked about storytelling, how to storytell, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then now we're talking about social media, which I'll be going over the social planner just really, really quickly so you all know. So this is not a sales pitch. You do not have to buy it. That is absolutely A-okay, no problem. I just wanted to go over it because it will give you context on what I was talking about when it came to the 4 factors. What exactly was I trying to say when it came to storytelling and the importance of that? So of course, in the beginning of the social planner, we break it up into a bunch of ideas. we break you up into, you should do a how-to video, you should do this. Regardless of what industry you're in, we give you lots and lots of ideas in the beginning of the planner. Now it's really up to you as a business owner to separate it into 3 main categories, which is 1, your business objective. So it could be awareness, it could be getting to know people, and then 2, your social media goals. So that could be trying to have engagement, it could be trying to get comments going up, and then last will be how you're going to measure those goals to make sure that those goals actually do align with what you're trying to accomplish. So for example, a goal for yourself, a business goal, would be making a certain number in sales, let's say. The social media goal that you're going to try and do is engagement. You're going to base that off of how many people are going to engage in your content, engage in the aspect of buying with you. And then the way to measure that will be through direct messages, through comments, etc. And it's really important to remember this because what you say really does matter when you're trying to think about the factors that influence consumer behavior. So choosing the ideas strategically to make sure that they actually do influence consumer behavior. Okay, so the next step to all of this is caption first, right? So in the planner I go over, it's really simple. We tell to you, first of all, to write down your captions first rather than thinking about the media. So you're probably thinking to yourself, what does that mean? So before you pick the photo, before you pick the graphic, before you pick the video that you're going to make, writing down your story, writing down how you're going to influence that consumer, writing down exactly what you want to say and the way you want to say it prior to selecting the graphic that you want to choose will go such a long way to be more intentional with the content you put out, to actually practice storytelling, to actually practice these ideas of influencing consumer behavior, because now you've taken the creative out of it. You've only focused 100% on what you're going to say rather than adding things like colors and logos and fonts, etc., that tend to dilute the message before actually getting to the point through writing. So in the planner, we go over caption first, and that's something that you can practice with yourself. So step 2, caption first. Now step 3 is writing down, of course, on a monthly aspect. So we break it down through quarters. And I always recommend people to look at their content in quarters because they're thinking to themselves, how far in advance should I be planning? It should be a quarter in advance, so 3 months in advance, because yes, things may be coming up, but the most important here is trends. So when it comes to consumer behavior, you have to think to yourself, with your ideal consumer, what trends are going to be very popular for them? If I myself am thinking to myself that, yes, my consumer is very much into music, so obviously summertime is going to be great because there were festivals that were going to go on, but now we're going live with those. That's a trend that you definitely want to consider. Or let's say that maybe you're in real estate and you notice that the spring market is usually the busiest part of the year. So that's a trend that you can definitely capitalize on. So it's definitely starting to think a little bit more intentionally about your quarters and the trends that happen when it comes to consumer behavior. And then last, and certainly not least, is your analytics. The biggest and gravest mistake that comes with consumer behavior is trying to influence a consumer without actually understanding what the consumer wants. So you're thinking to yourself, that's great. So every single time, so in the planner, we give you a space where you're able to 100% write out what happens every single month. And if you don't purchase the planner, this is a great way for you to do this too, is that every single month, what you'll do is you'll write down all the posts that you have done. So let's say you posted 20 posts. And you'll look back and see this one kind of performed better than the other one. I wonder why. And you'll notice maybe it's because I gave a little bit more education tips. Maybe because I actually commented on this one. Maybe it's because I posted super early at 5 a.m. I didn't realize I had an audience then. So it's interesting to jump in every single month to think of, okay, yes, consumer behavior is important, but what are they telling me? And then at the end of the year, after every single month, after you've recorded these things, next year when you're thinking about trends, next year when you're planning your content, next year when you're thinking about what resonated with my audience the most, you end up seeing that it actually worked and you're basing it off historical information, historical data, rather than thinking of what you think would work. And that way you're able to be more intentional with your brand, and you're able to be a little bit more mindful of what you say on social media. So that's kind of what I went over today. It was a lot of information. I know it was definitely interesting to see the psychological aspect of it, especially with storytelling and how things like Cinderella, for example, is a very grave story in reality for the Grimm brothers that has a deeper meaning to it. So that's an example there. But if you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out. And I know it's a lot to context with, but the basic thing to come that, the lesson, the number one thing that comes out of all of this when it comes to social media, when it comes to branding, when it comes to marketing, is really sitting down and taking the time to storytell. That words do have power, that what you say goes farther than what you want to post, and being intentional instead of thinking that you have to post, but rather just choosing the times that you feel like would actually make an impact to your community. And that can be very difficult because I know we're in this process and mindset that we have to stay relevant, we have to post, but how you do that definitely matters just as much as well. Thank you all so much for joining in. I know it was very, very short. Let me know if you have any questions, but of course, feel free to reach out if you need anything. If you want to reach me out to me, my Instagram is Joanne J. Bart, and of course, the Instagram account is at Marketing YEG. And we have all these different amazing women that can answer you if I cannot reach it. So feel free to reach out. And I also include, I think, my email on this. Yes, I did. So I definitely include my email if you do have any questions. Thank you again, Des, for this amazing opportunity. Thank you, the Creative Hive, for letting me chat with your community. And I cannot wait to be a part and an audience of the other ones that do end up happening, because there's just so many great speakers that I think deserve that absolute recognition. And so I cannot wait to see who else is in the lineup. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and enjoy the sunlight. I cannot wait to see you all again.